This right here is the Panasonic Leica 25-50mm f1.7. My most favorite lens alongside this 10-25mm f1.7, which is also by Panasonic and Leica. Both lenses share the exact same design, except for the sun hood as you can see here, and therefore have the same filter thread diameter. This is perfect for circular filters of all kinds because you will only have to buy filters once, unless you're of course planning to use both at the same time. Both lenses have almost the exact same weight, which is great for gimbal use because you won't have to constantly rebalance after switching lenses. And I can also confirm that it offers you that crispy Leica look with great micro contrast and outstanding optical performance for a constant f1.7 lens. I agree that this lens is not your typical lightweight micro four thirds lens, but it is definitely lighter than it looks, and it balances really nicely on the Panasonic GH5. I've personally been using this camera system for almost 5 years now, and I've reviewed tons of different micro four thirds lenses in the past, but I never really found something like this up until now. I'd even go so far and say that these two lenses right here are probably everything you will ever need for most regular type of work. Your mileage may of course vary though, especially if you're into wildlife photography or videography and need a longer focal length than 50mm or 100mm full frame equivalent, and the same applies for architecture and real estate, where 10mm or 20mm full frame equivalent on the wide end could simply not be enough to get everything into the frame. While you could technically stitch multiple stills to create a larger field of view whenever you need it, this will of course not work for videos. One thing you should never forget though is to max out your craft and skill before diving into new equipment. Oftentimes you can create a workaround for a specific issue without the need for additional equipment. Just think out of the box whenever you can. But now let's talk about the actual specs and performance of the Panasonic Leica 25-50mm f1.7. Build quality is simply outstanding with these Leica lenses. The metal housing on the 25-50 feels just as robust as on the 10-25. The focus, zoom and aperture ring are all running very smoothly, and the lens is properly weather sealed. Just like the 10-25, the 25-50 also has a focus clutch, which allows you to bypass the electronic fly-by-wire focusing and offers perfectly linear mechanical focusing. One difference between these two lenses I noticed though is the fact that the lens elements don't move on the 25-50 when zooming in or out, and I actually prefer this over the 10-25 zooming mechanism because it doesn't throw off balance on a gimbal as much. But from what I've heard, designing a 10-25 is a lot harder than designing a 25-50, so this might as well just be a physical restriction. On top of that, fixing only one axis is usually done in only a few seconds, so this isn't really an issue anyway. The lens has a 77mm filter thread and is overall just very nicely built. Although this lens is one of the heavier ones in the micro four thirds system, I still think that the weight of around 654 grams is definitely worth it. Especially if you consider that equivalent prime lenses would actually weigh more than that single lens, and you'd have to swap lenses all the time to get to your desired focal length. Whenever I want to save as much weight as possible, and let's say travel photography is my only objective, I usually go with the Panasonic Leica 12-60mm f2.8-4 instead, which only weighs around 320 grams and offers a huge focal range. And by the way, I'm filming with it right now. Just like the 25-50mm f1.7, this lens is a compromise though. You're trading range for aperture. Taking photos in low light is possible with the 12-60, but won't yield the same results as the 25-50, which captures roughly 1.5 times more light. The 25-50 or 50-100mm full frame equivalent has a very nice focal length in my opinion. It is perfect for people, portraits and beauty shots. It also works great for close-ups, detail shots and other B-roll footage. Take a look at the effective zoom range you have for the 10-25 and 25-50 right here. As I said before, this might not be enough for wildlife or faraway subjects, and perhaps some type of indoor videography where more field of view is needed and you can't simply stitch multiple photos, but for everything else, these two lenses should be pretty much everything you will ever need. Especially with that constant f1.7 aperture, which leads us to our next point, aperture. The constant f1.7 aperture on the 25-50mm is probably the biggest argument to get this lens. Having a constant aperture means that there will be no change in exposure when zooming, which is really good for videos. You can also change your aperture manually by twisting the corresponding ring on the lens. This gives you maximum control and allows you to control your exposure very smoothly because the ring is declicked and very fine adjustments are possible. I have to say though that I personally really rarely use the manual control here because the automatic exposure works so damn well and I usually can't focus pull and adjust exposure both at the same time. If you find yourself in a real production though, with a dedicated focus puller, this could be a whole different story though. In this case, it is always great to have maximum control over everything. So now that we've talked about the specs, let's take a look at actual image quality. As I said before, I am amazed by the image quality of this lens. It is on par with other Micro Four Thirds prime lenses, which is absolutely outstanding for a zoom lens. Just to give you an example here, take a look at these two shots of the 25-50mm f1.7 and the 42.5mm f1.2 Nocticron lens, which is a prime lens. Even at f1.7, the 25-50 is noticeably sharper and has less chromatic aberrations. Chromatic aberrations are something I've always struggled with on the 42.5mm f1.2, while it goes pretty much unnoticed on the 25-50. Not only that, the overall sharpness is spot on at f1.7, and the 25-50 is even better than the 10-25 at 25mm, which is already famous for its sharpness at wide open apertures. When it comes to flaring is alright in my opinion and looks quite decent, although this is of course a somewhat subjective matter. I also haven't noticed any distracting ghosting unless you shoot directly into the sun, where this effect might even be desired. Here are a few shots to show you vignetting. I honestly couldn't care less as this is easily corrected in post if ever needed. I personally didn't find any negatives in terms of image quality about this lens in real world use, and I think that that's the most important. Don't pixel peep too much, it's not worth it. The autofocus backgrounds can look somewhat distracting sometimes, especially with highlights, but this is to be expected with a zoom lens, and I still think that it looks really nice. I honestly don't know what it is about this lens, but it feels like there's more dynamic range or something. The contrast and colors just pop and look really nice, even without any adjustments. I just really like the look of the images you can get out of this lens, and they look pretty similar if you compare them to the 10-25. Of course, the 25-50 will give you more background separation though, as it is a longer lens. All in all, I am very happy with the results I get with this lens, and I think that it mixes in nicely with the 10-25. Next up, autofocus. The autofocus of the Panasonic Leica 25-50mm f1.7 is fast and precise, but overall a little bit slower than the one on the 10-25mm. This makes sense though, as depth of field is of course smaller on the lens with a longer focal range, so focusing is a bit harder here. When it comes to video autofocus, I still think that the camera itself, the Panasonic GH5, is the bigger bottleneck here. The GH5 got a lot better with several firmware updates over the past almost 5 years now, but it is still not very predictable and therefore not really usable in a professional environment in my opinion. When it comes to manual focusing, the Panasonic Leica 25-50 has an electronic focusing system that is based on fly-by-wire technology, like many other Micro Four Thirds lenses. I honestly don't like the system because it is quite unpredictable though. If you turn the focus ring by the same amount, you'll get varying results depending on the speed. Since you can always just pull back on the focus ring to get perfectly linear manual focus though, this isn't really an issue anymore like it was in some older Micro Four Thirds lenses that don't have that feature. I also read that newer cameras like the GH5 Mark II do actually support linear focusing with fly-by-wire, and you can even adjust the amount of rotation needed to go from minimum focus to infinity. But I haven't personally tested it yet, so I can't really confirm if it is a feature worth using. But with this lens you shouldn't even worry about it because you can always just simply bypass the fly-by-wire system and use the mechanical clutch instead, which is a lot better, and I always suggest using that mode instead. The lens has a minimum focusing distance of only around 28 centimeters, which makes it a decent macro lens too. This is pretty uncommon for a zoom lens like that, and even the 42.5mm f1.2 Nocticron lens has a minimum focusing distance of 50 centimeters, and my old Canon 85mm f1.7 and other lenses have 85 centimeters or even more, if I remember correctly. So that is a pretty good performer right here for macro photography. Oh, and by the way, remember these two lenses I just called are prime lenses. Well, this one is a zoom, so it's amazing. And here's one more benefit for the video shooters out there. I didn't notice any focus breathing, which is great because your field of view won't be affected while you focus. I also tested whether this lens is parfocal or not, and it looks like it actually is. If you zoom in, then focus on a subject and zoom out again, the focus doesn't shift away from your subject, which is just great. Overall, manual focusing is really a pleasure to work with when you pull back on the ring because the reaction is immediate and has no latency like some other fly-by-wire systems. Sadly, this lens has no image stabilization, so you will have to rely on your camera's in-body image stabilization, or IBIS in short. I can confirm that the 25-50 plus GH5 IBIS works really well though. If your camera has no IBIS, you might as well consider using a gimbal, which should give you great results too. All of the shots you've seen so far were shot handheld without any gimbal on the Panasonic Lumix GH5. I think that the results look quite decent for a lens with that focal length. Let's talk about price. With a price tag of roughly $1,800 in the US and 2,000 euros in the European Union, this is definitely not a cheap lens. But if you ask me, I think it is absolutely worth the money for several reasons we've already highlighted in this video. Let's break everything down once again. The 25-50 basically combines multiple prime lenses in one with a constant f1.7 aperture and a weight that is above the average for Micro Four Thirds, but still reasonable, especially if you count the weight of the several lenses that this one can replace. The 25-50 outperforms some other primes in different categories and overall offers image quality that is pretty outstanding for a zoom lens like that. If you use this together with the 10-25, you will have a great kit for most types of work and you won't have to rebalance your gimbal when switching from the 25 to the 10-25 and vice versa. On top of that, you will only have to buy filters once for one diameter because both of these lenses share the same filter thread size, unless you're of course trying to use both at the same time. I have also reviewed the 10-25 in the past and I am still amazed by its performance and use it as my main lens for most projects. Before that, I have used a Metabone Speed Booster XL with a Sigma 18-35mm f1.8 like many other people out there, but I think that the 10-25 overall just offers an even better native experience on the Panasonic Lumix GH5. And the 25-50 is no exception here. This is pretty much a direct answer to Sigma's 50-100mm f1.8, which by the way comes in at a weight of roughly 1,490 grams. That's almost 1 kilogram more than a 25-50. I could go on and on here, but I think you get the point. I am a huge fan of this lens and I can't wait to see more new focal lengths with such fast apertures. If you're into wildlife photography and want to capture faraway subjects, I have also created a review on the Panasonic Leica 50-200mm f2.824 and the 2x teleconverter. If you are interested in the other gear I am using to create my videos, you can find a link to my kit page as well as some of the other reviews I've created in the past in the video description. I really hope this video was helpful for you. Please let me know what you guys think about this lens and if you agree or disagree with me on the points here. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one.